Okay, British and American culture class. I just got the second quiz results this morning. Much better. First of all, 44 people out of 45 took the quiz, which is by itself an improvement from 36. So just doing the quiz is going to be helpful, but the average was very low on the first one, and getting close to reasonable average in the second quiz, around 7 out of 15, which that doesn't sound great, but that's a lot better than 4. So if on quiz 3 the average is 10, we keep improving, then I think there's no problem. Tomorrow, a few students are going to write, so this is going to be a bit rushed for them to watch this video. But for the rest of you, tomorrow is November 5th, and as I said, remember the 5th of November, because that is Guy Fawkes Day, the day that a Catholic, terrorist, insurrectionist, tried to blow up the Parliament building and the King. We've talked about King James enough. Remember, the Bible is one of the great achievements under his rule, and the Virginia colony and Jamestown they don't really make a lot of money, and there's a lot of people dying from disease and cold and starvation, but the tobacco industry, which will be the beginning of the source of revenue in the colonies for the British, will start to get going. And as I said, James himself was very against smoking, thought it was a horrible habit, and he's right. It's a bad habit, and it's bad for your body. But since he was short of money, he needed the customs, duties on those tobacco sales. So even though he wrote a book called The Counterblast to Tobacco, very aggressive thing, saying tobacco is terrible, he never really did anything, never made any laws to restrict it, because it was too important to his bank book. Now, one thing I want to make clear, Queen Elizabeth is dead. James is her nephew, and he is Scottish, so he's actually the 6th King of Scotland. He's James the 6th. And we can't talk about Mary, Queen of Scots, and all the crazy things that happened when he was growing up, but he was a pretty good king in Scotland. And when Queen Elizabeth died and he became the King of England and Scotland, because remember, Scotland has never been conquered, it's a separate kingdom. So James wants to have one kingdom, but it's not. He is the King of Scotland, he's James the 6th of Scotland, he's James the 1st of England. And the Tudors are gone, so he is a Stuart, okay? He's a Stuart, all right? So remember, the Tudors are only those kind of 3 generations: Henry the 7th, Henry the 8th, and his children Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. There's 5 of them, but they're only in power for 100 years or so, and so the 16th century is all about the different things that happen with those kings and queens. Likewise, the 17th century, the Stuarts will rule until for about 100 years, almost exactly, and then at the end of the 17th century, Queen Anne, the last Stuart, will die, and then they will have to start a new dynasty. But that's beyond the scope of chapter 3. So remember, the midterm is the important cultural concepts like context and geographic location and dominant culture versus subculture versus counterculture, those things in the introduction, plus chapter 1 to 3. And then it's a hard stop. Nothing after chapter 3 will be on the exam. So this is the material I'm reminding you here, since I cut off part of these 5. Actually, I looked it up, and Robert Buckles, Professor Buckles, he actually calls them tensions. I said concerns or issues. It's all the same thing. These are problems. These are the 5 problems, right? And I said Queen Elizabeth was very talented at managing the kingdom, despite some real disadvantages. One being a young woman in a kingdom which really wanted a male ruler, especially after Bloody Mary, killed a lot of people and tried to make the kingdom Catholic again. So remember that back and forth, Protestant Catholic kind of thing that goes on. Queen Elizabeth calms everything down and manages it. James, he's smart enough not to make any of these problems serious, but he has the problems, and the problems, he's not as good a leader. He's not as good a monarch, king or queen, as Queen Elizabeth. So his financial problems get worse, and his control of he's got Scotland too. So like things are happening up in Scotland, and he never really goes back up to Scotland. Scotland starts to get, out of control. Like they have local control in Scotland, and technically James is the king, who they recognize, but he's not there, and he's focused on his English kingdom, and the Scottish people don't like that, right? Understandably. So he also has a problem because he has a problem with money. He has a problem with Parliament, because he wants money, and Parliament says no. We're not giving you money for an army. We're not going to give you money for things that, for fancy clothes. We don't want to pay more taxes, and you're not giving us good reasons to. So if you want taxes, then you're going to have to compromise. You're going to have to give up some of your power. But James is not interested in doing that at all. Okay? So that's this conflict between the people in Parliament, then the representatives of the kingdom, and James is ongoing. But he doesn't push it too far. Unfortunately, his son, Charles, when James dies, is less tactful and less careful about these tensions and these issues. Charles makes it clear that his wife is Catholic. His wife is Catholic. She's Portuguese, I believe. Anyway, she's a Catholic queen, and she is allowed to practice, like she's allowed to go to her own special church and do Catholic stuff. Charles is Anglican, but in Scotland they have their own church, which is, as I said before, Anglicans kind of a little bit Catholic, and that's the Church of England. But the Church of Scotland is more like what you see in the textbook, where you see these Puritans, right? Let me find the page quickly. Chapter 3. It's right above the part about Sir Thomas More. So Sir Thomas More, to just go back in time, I told you Sir Thomas More wrote Utopia, and it was a criticism of Henry VIII having too much power. He believed that the Pope was like Catholic first, always. Henry VIII said, you have to promise, you have to swear to follow me as the head of the church. And Thomas More refuses, and even though he was the Lord Chancellor and he was a friend of Henry's ego can't tolerate any sort of resistance or rebellion or criticism. So he demands that everybody swear that to follow him as the head of the church. But Thomas More is one of the English Catholics who refuses, and he's a lawyer, so he goes to court, and they have a trial, and he's really smart, and he wins his case, but it doesn't matter because Henry wants him dead. So, although he argues effectively a lot of reasonable points, what happens is, despite his expertise in law and his faith and his profession that I will be loyal to the Catholic Church and my king, that you don't have to choose, you can do both, Henry rejects that and he kills him. As I told you in class, this is what Henry does. If people reject his orders, then chances are they're going to the block to be executed. Okay? Now on the same page 100, above Sir Thomas More, which there's a lot of good information about him in the Catholic Church, which should help you understand really what it was like, to be confused, and how the Reformation in England caused probably the religious issue is the biggest one, right? Money has been a problem for hundreds of years. The English kings have never been very rich. That's a long story that we sort of started talking about way back when Edward III was, fighting against France, and, as long as they were winning, they had enough money, but as soon as they lost the war against France and lost their territory, all of a sudden, there's no money left. Henry VII manages to be very careful with his money, saves it, and Henry VIII spends it all. So now we're in the situation again where the king needs the agreement of the wealthy people of the kingdom for money, or he can't do anything. He can't even really clean his castles or have servants or mistresses like kings are supposed to do. He can't buy artwork. He can't build castles because the only way he doesn't have any money left. So the only way to get it is to ask Parliament to, pay taxes, and they don't want to do that unless, again, the king gives up more power. So this is the struggle between James and the Parliament, which James and the Parliament get along not so well. But Charles, basically, he tells everybody to go home, right? These people called Puritans, there's a great little, on page 98 in 99, there's a great little description. I think I wrote this stuff, but I think it's pretty well written. I'll just read. I don't normally do this, but I'll just read part of what I was trying to explain. Puritans it was an insult. Calling a Puritan meant that not that they were pure in a good way, but that they were so radical that all they would do was work, work, pray, sleep, and eat. Right? Not play, pray, right? No playing, no dancing, no drinking, no festivals. What they just want to do is study the Bible, go to church, work, and that's the way to be a good Christian person. So it starts out Puritan being as an insult, because everybody's like, you think you're so pure, but actually you're just boring and you don't know how to have any fun. You're a killjoy, right? In fact, this is a quote coming from it's coming from another text from Robert Buckles. In fact, some critics of the movement defined Puritanism as the fear that someone somewhere was having a good time, as their approach to worship was serious and somber. Serious, and that's boring, in other words, right? Church can be practiced in many different ways. Remember the differences between Catholic and Protestant. Whereas Catholics, there's a lot of festivals. There's lots of, idols. There's lots of decorations. Sometimes there's drinking and dancing and all kinds of things. All these things Puritans hate, right? So the Civil War happens, and it happens because Charles keeps trying to get Parliament to give him money, and they say no unless you do this, like you fire these ministers, or you give more power, to Parliament to choose to make laws. And he refuses, and he sends them home. But then 1 year later, he needs them to come back. So they come back, and he argues with them for a while, and then he gets frustrated, and then he sends them home. So there's no progress that's made. He tries various kind of, almost like Donald Trump, tariffs, right? It's not taxes, it's tariffs. So he's using customs duties, and he uses this thing called a ship money, which is designed as an emergency tax. When England is being attacked, you collect money from all of the coastal cities, and you use that money to build ships. There's no emergency. So this makes people say this is not an emergency situation. This is a tax. This is just you taking money from everybody who lives in a city on the ocean or near the sea or on a river. Again, this is just like Donald Trump or other leaders saying there's an emergency. We need to do this. We need to attack. We need to raise money, or we need to, send police officers into cities to control the out of control protesting and violence, when it's not true. Like, emergencies are when seriously violent, bad things are happening. That's not the case. He's making up an emergency so that he can collect money. So he does it the first year. He does it. A lot of people pay, but nobody attacks them. He keeps this ship tax going, which is not supposed to be. It's an emergency, so it should be like a one-time thing. If you do it every year, it's a tax. right? It's a ship tax. It's not a ship money emergency. It's a ship tax. So this makes everyone who's paying it angry. People start to stop paying it. People get thrown in jail. Charles ends up becoming less and less popular. Eventually, he has to run away from London, raise his flag, and all the people who support the king, who are called royalists, and their nicknames are Cavaliers because of their hair and their shiny, equipment and everything. They gather. I think he goes up to Oxford and plants the standard. They form an army, and the parliamentarians who, not initially, it's actually a man named Fairfax, but I just got to skip over him because there's too many names. But the commander of the parliamentarians, his name is Lord Fairfax, whose daughter will end up, dating George Washington. Strange, sort of, parallel there. But anyway, Sally Fairfax. Maybe she's not his daughter, maybe descendant, granddaughter or something. But anyway, the thing here is that you need to know is this English Civil War has a lot of characteristics of revolution. Like the French Revolution, and in the second half of our class, like the American Revolutionary War, where they decide to separate from the British Empire and establish a republic. Okay, and the shortly after that, the French are going to do the same thing. The English are doing this. This is in the 1640s. This is in the middle of the century, right? In the 1640s, when this happens. So they fight each other to the death, pretty much. It's a brutal civil war, just like the American Civil War, just like the French Revolution. They're killing each other. And every time someone dies, they're fighting themselves. So, every time somebody gets killed, it's an English person. Brothers and uncles and fathers and sons are on opposite sides. Generally, the Puritans and the more Protestant people are fighting on the parliamentarian side, and they have London, and they have more money. They have more at first the king's army is better trained and has better equipment and has an advantage. But in terms of numbers and in terms of money and equipment and access to trade, they're in big trouble, because the longer the war goes, the stronger the parliamentarians are going to be. It's the same thing in the United States. The North, and the South are pretty evenly matched at the beginning, but the longer the war goes, the economic power of the northern United States is too much. They have better equipment, they have more people, they have factories, all this kind of stuff is working on the parliamentarians' side. Plus Cromwell, it turns into this. He's one of the greatest cavalry commanders of the age. When Fairfax retires, he becomes sort of, the driving force behind this civil war. And although it happens in kind of two parts, the end result is that Cromwell decides, Charles is going to go to Scotland, or he's going to hide, or he's always going to have friends supporting him, and he's the king. The only way to get rid of him, the only way to stop him, is to cut off his head. The only way to stop this fighting is to eliminate him completely. So that's what happens. He is given a trial. He says, I don't recognize the court because the royal court is my court. How can you judge me? I'm the king. You can't judge the king. King judges you. That's going right back to Magna Carta, right? John is saying, You guys can't make me do stuff. I do what I want. I'm chosen by God, and I can judge you. You can't judge me. I don't recognize this court. However, they make the argument that the people are being represented now by Parliament, not by the king. Traditionally, the king's power comes from his power comes from the people and the kingdom. There's no separation. The body of the kingdom and the power of the kingdom depends on the king. Weak king, weak kingdom. Strong kingdom, strong king. Like, there's a relationship there, right? So they're breaking this, I don't know how old it is, hundreds of years of precedent here when they say, no, we are representing the people and you are a criminal. You have committed crimes against the English people, and for that you will be punished by death. So a lot of people are hesitating to do this because it's never been done before, but it gets done, and Cromwell is one of those guys who pushes for people to sign the death warrant, and King Charles is killed. His son, Charles II, runs away and escapes, and Cromwell, there's no king. So some people suggest, well, Cromwell, you should be the king. We don't have a king, so let's have you be the king. But he refuses, and they try to make a commonwealth. For about 5 years, they try to just run the country like a democracy, like a commonwealth, and it doesn't work. The remaining lots of the members have left because they were supporting the king. So all you have remaining really is these radical people, especially Puritans, and they can't run the government properly. They still have all these problems. Who is power now, right? So Cromwell gets fed up, and after 5 years, he's like, "Get out of here! Everybody go home. We'll have a new election, and I'm going to be the new head of the government. I'm going to be called the Lord Protector." Okay? And in a lot of ways, he is more powerful than any king, I would say, since Edward I. He's the most powerful leader of England, going back to Edward I, or you might, I think Edward I is a great choice. Richard the Lionheart, Henry II, William the Conqueror. These guys had an iron grip on the country. He's a general, he controls the army, and he's in control of the political, he's in control of the parliament too. So religion also is, he's a very, very fanatical Puritan person. So he, at one point, he cancels Christmas. That is very unpopular, and that just causes everybody to fight each other. Puritans are trying to open their shops. Anglicans and Catholics and anybody who wants to have fun is trying to close their shops and getting drunk. So it's a weird situation where the people who are loyal to the government are trying not to have a holiday, and everybody else is trying to have a holiday. And Christmas is a little bit chaotic anyway, so there's lots of drinking and partying, which is what Puritans hate. So they try to cancel Christmas, but Christmas cannot be canceled. It's unstoppable. What else we got here? As I told you before, Scotland, still, Charles is the King of Scotland and England separately. Charles, he's the King of Scotland. even though Lord Protector Cromwell is the protector of England, and England is a republic, but Scotland is still a kingdom. It's not, they're not together yet, right? So what happens is Presbyterianism takes over. Scottish people study, they read the Bible, they read it in English, they study books of philosophy, and they start to produce some really, really intelligent, I guess you would call them now, we would probably call them philosophers or naturalists or historians, but David Hume and Adam Smith will come along. Famous people like James Watt, eventually Alexander Graham Bell. There's a shocking, surprising number of inventors and philosophers that are produced by Scotland, and it has nothing to do with money or, population. It has to do, I think, with literacy. They're not genetically smarter than anybody else. They live in the mountains and chase sheep and goats around. That doesn't make you smarter. But they read, and some of them, they start going to university. They start getting educated, and some of them come up with some really important inventions and ideas. Capitalism is one of them, and the steam engine and electricity and the telephone. These are all really Scottish people. Andrew Carnegie, at one time the richest man in the world in the United States, the steel magnate, who we'll talk about in the next semester, Scottish. So they read, they studied, they moved abroad. They in 1707, they make a peaceful union because Scotland has the same problem as England, but worse. Their economy is shattered. The English don't help them on purpose because they've been enemies for so long. So, the Scottish people, you have to read about them, but they're very resilient, they're very tough, and when they start to, I'm not going to say get civilized, but when Edinburgh and Glasgow, their city centers start to develop, and they study the Bible, and then they study other things because everybody starts to have a high, like the literacy rate goes up, rapidly. There's more people that can read per capita in Scotland than England for a while, and then England catches up. There's a few other countries like Denmark and Sweden that have high literacy rates, but we're talking like the America too, when it starts to get going, has a very high literacy rate, which corresponds to innovation and better education, which is what the Scottish end up doing very well. They're also very good fighters. The technology and the ideas and the toughness, they end up being a very important part of, the British Empire. Really, I doubt very, very much that the British Empire would exist if Scotland had not, in 1707, decided by a very narrow vote to join England and form one kingdom. So then, the King of England is the King of the United Kingdom, no longer the King of Scotland and England. So it's the King of the United Kingdom and Ireland, because Ireland never becomes part of the Union. That's a very important part of the story, which hopefully we'll touch on again later. But really, what Ireland is Ireland is treated like a colony, whereas Scotland becomes a junior partner, and this gives them an advantage, and they're Protestant, and of course the Irish remain staunchly Catholic as part of their identity, and Cromwell is one of the most hated English historical figures in Ireland, because as all of this civil war was happening, Ireland sort of took advantage of the chaos in the English Civil War to try and assert their own sovereignty to retake the Irish kingdom for themselves. And when the parliamentarians won and Charles was killed, Cromwell led an expedition to Ireland and absolutely, destroyed every attempt at resistance that the Irish made. He was not sympathetic to women or children or cold or starvation or anything. He destroyed as many of the Irish as he could, believing that English Puritanism was the true religion, because he is a religious fanatic, and that the Irish deserved to be killed, sort of in the way that a fanatic would attack another person of a different religion, believing that they were your enemy, or they were dangerous, or that they were not human. And that's certainly the worst thing about Oliver Cromwell, is his treatment of the Irish. When the Scottish rebel, he treats them totally differently. He defeats them, but he doesn't leave a complete, he doesn't destroy everything and leave, a sort of, what am I trying to say? He doesn't destroy villages and kill citizens and treat them as subhuman. He sort of pleads with them, and not pleads with them, but requests that they stand down, and he's only going to fight them if necessary, which he does, but not in the brutal, violent, destructive way. And when he's in Ireland, he goes way too far in his persecution of the Irish. So he's probably the number one, if not number one, he's in the top few most hated English figures. So there's a little bit of controversy about Cromwell. Certainly a capable administrator, dedicated, a great military commander, but also a sort of genocidal fanatic who was not up to the ethical standards of what we expect today. I don't think we can even forgive him for being alive 300 years ago. That there's not really any excuse for that extreme behavior. No matter what age you live in, that's not acceptable. I'm part Irish, so I had to make that speech, and it has to be emphasized that very effective at managing the Republic. He dies, and after that, strangely, and this is what I mean about a very conservative country, that England, the very conservative country that England is, they're not sure what they want to do in terms of government, but they know they didn't like all as efficient as Cromwell's, Commonwealth and protectorship were. They didn't like the oppressiveness of it, and the Puritans the Puritan sort of revolution did not convince people to change their religion. So there's still a small number of people. The Puritans sort of temporarily had power because Cromwell was one of them, but now that they're a minority, they're a small portion of the population, and most English people miss, ironically, Charles and James and Elizabeth, even though they were far from perfect. They want that back, so they invite the son of the guy they killed to come back and become the king, and he comes back on a ship called the Royal Charles, and then he rules. He's already in middle age, so he rules for a while. His court is quite fun and extravagant. He's got lots of music and he's got lots of paintings, and he's famous for gambling and good times and mistresses. And then he dies, and he doesn't have a son. He has lots of royal bastards because he had many girlfriends. But he decides to pass the throne to his brother James II because he doesn't actually have a son from his queen, because she couldn't have children. So you end up with a James II. He's the one who's called the Duke of York, and he's the one who takes New Amsterdam, and it's renamed New York after James II. But he's Catholic. Nobody wants to be Catholic anymore. There's not very many Puritans. There's not very many Catholics. Everybody's in the middle, Anglican and Presbyterian. So he gets deposed, and William III, the Dutch king, who's married to the daughter of James, he comes back to England and he takes over England, and James runs away. And that's called the Glorious Revolution. William rules with his wife Mary until Queen Anne takes over, and they fight against the French the entire time. That was William's mission in life, is to stop Louis XIV. And in 1707, the alliance between France and Scotland finally falls apart, and the Union of Great Britain is signed, and that brings us up to the midterm, right? The end. The Stuarts are done. It starts in 1485 with the Tudors, and then 1603, Queen Elizabeth dies. The Stuarts rule for the 17th century, and then when Anne dies, they invite some German guy named George over to be the next king. He doesn't even speak English, but her great achievement really is this Union of Great Britain, which sets the stage for the continued expansion of the British Empire. Okay, I think I've hopefully gotten all the stuff in that I wanted to. 30 multiple choice, two writing answers, 5 points each for a total of 40. That's the midterm. I wish you good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow or Friday. And that's it. We'll move on after that midterm has been taken care of. Thank you for listening.